My sister constantly entered my apartment as if it were hers. She perused my mail, used my belongings, searched my drawers 23 times within 6 months. I urged her to stop. She chuckled. "You're making too much of it." So I quietly departed. A week later, the alarm activated at 3 a.m. That's when the whole scenario shifted. What if your own family, the people who were supposed to protect you, systematically dismantled your sense of safety, piece by piece, until your own home felt like a cage? I never thought my sister, my own flesh and blood, would violate my space so completely, until she didn't just walk through my front door, she took over my entire life, and turned it into her own twisted stage. Start of story: the first time I realized my apartment in Boston wasn't truly mine, it wasn't some dramatic movie moment. No stranger in the hallway, no footsteps behind the door. It was smaller than that. Quieter. And somehow much worse. I came home, and a lamp I knew I'd turned off was glowing. The air smelled like someone else's shampoo, sweet, floral, clinging to the steam still trapped in the bathroom mirror. And my favorite throw blanket? Folded. Perfectly. The way my mom folds blankets. Tight corners, edges so neat it looked like the room itself had been corrected while I was gone. Outside, the city kept moving, oblivious. Tires hissed on wet pavement. Somewhere down Boylston, a siren rose, then faded into the night. I stood in my entryway, keys still clutched in my hand, listening. Just the low hum of the building, the faint rattle of the heater, the soft hush of my own breathing. Nothing else. I told myself I was being dramatic. That I'd probably just forgotten. That I was the kind of person who notices too much, and imagines the rest. But I wasn't imagining it. Not at all. By the time it was all over, my younger sister, Claire, had let herself into my apartment 23 times. In just 6 months. I didn't count at first. I'm not that kind of person, not until my life starts feeling like someone else is editing it when my back is turned. It took a while for the pattern to sharpen into something undeniable. A credit card statement I'd left inside its envelope? Now sitting open, like a mouth. A package addressed to me, slit cleanly down the side. A new bottle of olive oil, half empty, even though I hadn't cooked all week. My pajama drawer slightly ajar, like it had been pushed shut too fast by someone who just didn't care. Where are you right now as you're listening to this? For me, I was curled up on my couch with a mug of chamomile tea, still in my work clothes, shoes kicked off, staring at the peephole like it might blink back at me. My name is Marin. I'm 32, and I work as a project coordinator for a logistics company downtown. The kind of job where everything's a deadline, and every mistake has a number attached to it. People like to joke that Boston makes you tough, that you either grow a backbone or you freeze. I thought moving into my own place would be the moment I finally grew mine. I had a one-bedroom in a mid-rise building not far from Back Bay. Close enough to walk to the T when the weather behaved. Close enough to pretend I was the kind of woman who had her life neat and settled. I paid my rent on time. My fridge was stocked. I made my bed most mornings. I should have felt safe. But safety isn't just locks and deadbolts. Safety is knowing no one will touch what's yours when you're not there. Claire is 5 years younger than me, 27. And she's always had this way of moving through the world like doors should just open before she reaches them. She's pretty in that effortless way. Big eyes, glossy hair, the kind of smile that makes people want to give her a second chance. She calls herself a lifestyle influencer. Though most of her income comes in bursts, a brand deal here, a sponsored post there, and a lot of help from mom and dad in between. She's also the kind of person who can make any space feel like it belongs to her within minutes. She doesn't ask, she assumes. She doesn't apologize, she laughs it off and makes you feel uptight for even noticing. The first time she let herself in, she didn't even pretend to be sneaky. I came home from work and found her sitting cross-legged on my rug, my laptop open, my charger plugged into the wall, my mug in her hand. She looked up like I was the one who had surprised her. "Oh good," she said, like I'd been late for a meeting. I was getting bored. I remember blinking at her, still holding my tote bag, still thinking about the email I had to send. "Claire," I managed. "How did you get in?" She lifted a shoulder in a little shrug. "Mom gave me the spare." "Of course she did." I tried to keep my voice calm. "You can't just come in whenever you want." She rolled her eyes and waved a hand at the room. "It's not like I'm some random person. I'm your sister. Besides," she paused, her tone shifting into something almost pitying. "You work too much. You're always alone. It's sad." She said it was sad? Like she was diagnosing me. Like being alone in my own home was a symptom. And the thing is, a part of me still wanted to be the reasonable one, the mature one. I told myself she was just being Claire. I told myself I could fix it with a simple conversation. So I called Mom that night. "Mom," I said, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. I need you to take the spare key back from Claire. She cannot come into my apartment without asking. Mom sighed, like I'd asked her to refinance a house. Marin, honey, she's family. She was probably just checking on you. Checking on me? I tasted the words. They were bitter. She was using my things. Mom made that soft little sound she makes when she's about to turn my feelings into something inconvenient. You've always been sensitive. Claire's just trying to be close to you. I looked over at my coffee table. There was a smear of mascara on a napkin, black and careless. Claire hadn't just been close to me. She'd been inside my space, inside my life, leaving fingerprints I couldn't wash off. Then Dad came on the line for a moment, because Mom always puts Dad on the line like it's a way to seal the conversation. He didn't say much. He never does. Marin, he said, his voice flat. Just keep the peace. Your mom's right. Claire's family. Keep the peace. It's funny how that phrase always means the same thing. I should swallow my discomfort so no one else has to feel awkward. After that, the visits stopped being casual. They turned into something else. Something that felt like ownership. One afternoon, I came home and my mail was stacked in a neat pile on my kitchen counter. Not how I leave it. I leave it in a messy fan because I'm always rushing. The top envelope, a bank letter, had been opened and carefully resealed. The edge was still rough where the glue didn't quite catch. My stomach went cold. The way it does when you realize a boundary has already been crossed and you're only now finding the footprint. I stood there, staring at that envelope, trying to decide if I was overreacting, the way everyone always told me I was. I told myself, maybe I opened it and forgot. Maybe I was losing my mind. Then I saw the second envelope, a medical bill, also opened. The third, a piece of junk mail, untouched. Claire had picked and chosen. She had read what mattered. Another day it was my dresser drawers. I know my drawers. I know the way my sweaters sit in soft stacks and the way my sock drawer is crammed with mismatched pairs because I never have the patience to sort them. I came home and found my lingerie drawer pushed slightly too far in. One corner of a bra strap was caught in the gap, like it was trying to wave for help. Nothing was missing. That almost made it worse. It meant she wasn't stealing. She was searching. She was reminding me she could. Then it was the kitchen. Spices rearranged. My olive oil moved from the back to the front. My favorite mug, the one with the chipped rim that I keep because it makes tea taste like comfort, sitting in the sink with lipstick on the edge. Claire doesn't drink tea. Claire drinks iced coffee and calls it a personality. Every time, I'd feel the same slow rise of panic. Not a loud panic, a careful one, the kind that sits in your chest and makes you walk through your own home like you're intruding on someone else. I started testing myself, like a person who can't trust her own memory. I'd leave a pen on my desk at a certain angle. I'd place a hair tie on the bathroom counter. I'd tuck a receipt into a cookbook. And then I'd come home and find the pen moved, the hair tie gone, the receipt sitting on top of the cookbook, like someone had wanted me to notice. It wasn't just that Claire was coming in. It was that she wanted me to know she had been there. The worst part was how easy she made it sound when I finally caught her. I was standing in the hallway in socks, my heart already racing before the lock even clicked, because my body was learning fear the way it learns weather. She stepped inside with a tote bag and a grin. Hey, she said. I brought my ring light. I need your window for a shoot. Your place has better light than mine. You cannot keep doing this, I said, and my voice surprised me. It sounded steadier than I felt. Claire blinked, like she hadn't heard me right. Marin, seriously? I held my keys up, the way a person holds a tiny weapon. I am asking you to stop coming in here. You've opened my mail. You've gone through my drawers. You used my things like you live here. You don't. She laughed, quick and bright, like I told a joke. You are overreacting. God, you are always overreacting. That laugh did something to me. It made my skin feel too tight. It made the room tilt because it wasn't just a dismissal. It was the same look she used to give me as kids when I begged her to stop taking my stuff. The same look that said my discomfort was entertainment. I tried one more time. I need you to give me the key. She waved her hand like she was swatting a fly. Mom said I could have it. If you want to fight about it, fight with Mom. And there it was, the triangle. Claire tucked safely behind Mom and Dad, somewhere in the background, pretending he didn't hear the noise. I did fight with Mom. Not screaming, not dramatic, just firm. Mom, I said, I am not doing this. I am an adult. This is my home. I need my key back from Claire. Mom's voice turned sharp. Marin, don't make me choose between my daughters. I almost laughed then, because she had already chosen. She had chosen a long time ago. But all I said was, I am not asking you to choose. I am asking you to respect me. Dad picked up in the background, his tone tired. Marin, please, just let it go. Your mom has enough stress. Enough stress. It was always about Mom's stress. Never about my safety. Never about my right to breathe in my own home without wondering who had been there first. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed and listened to the city outside. Cars passing, a distant train horn, the faint thump of someone's music through the wall. Ordinary sounds. But they felt like they were happening in a world I couldn't quite reach. In my world, the lock didn't mean what it was supposed to mean. I wish I could tell you I stood up and fixed it right then, that I marched to my parents' house, took the key back, and laid down the law like some fearless woman in a movie. But the truth is, I was still trying to believe I could handle it gently. I was still trying to believe my family would hear me if I found the right words. I told myself it would calm down. I told myself Claire would get bored. I told myself Mom would eventually see how serious it was. I told myself Dad would finally step in. I told myself a lot of things, mostly because the alternative was admitting something that made my throat tighten, that my little sister didn't see me as a person with a life of my own. She saw me as an extension of her, a resource, a place to take from when it suited her. And if I'm being honest, the scariest part wasn't that Claire kept coming in. It was that I had started timing my days around her. I was coming home early to catch her. I was staying late at work to avoid walking into another surprise. I was checking my mail like it was evidence. I was living like someone who didn't fully own her own life. Still, at the end of that first stretch, I believed it could be solved with a better conversation, a firmer tone, a boundary set one more time, louder, clearer, impossible to misunderstand. I went to bed that night with my phone on the pillow beside me, like it could protect me just by being close. The lock was turned. The chain was on. The apartment was quiet. And I remember thinking, tomorrow, I will talk to them again. Tomorrow I will make them understand. Because I didn't know yet that in my family, understanding was never the goal. Control was. That word kept circling in my head the next morning as I got ready for work. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, brushing my teeth, watching my own eyes look back at me. Tired and slightly hollow, like someone who had slept but never really rested. I thought about the night before, about how easily my concerns had been waved away. And it hit me, none of this had actually started in my apartment. It had started years ago, long before I had a lease or a spare key to argue over. Claire had always been special, in our house. Not in the quiet way, not in the way that asked for patience or understanding. She was special in the loud way. The way that bent rules around her without anyone admitting they were bending. If she forgot her homework, Mom blamed the teacher for not being clear. If she missed curfew, Dad said it was good she had friends. If she snapped at me or took something that wasn't hers, it was brushed off as a phase or worse, as confidence. I learned early that there were two sets of expectations in our family. One was light and flexible, made of soft warnings and second chances. That one belonged to Claire. The other was heavy, exacting, full of shoulds, and why didn't yous? That one belonged to me. When I was a teenager, Claire could leave her room looking like a storm had passed through it, clothes on the floor, makeup smeared across the dresser, half-eaten snacks left under the bed. Mom would laugh and say she was creative. If my room looked like this, I'd be told to clean it immediately because I should know better. If Claire raised her voice, it was passion. If I did, it was disrespectful. I don't think my parents ever sat down and decided this. I think it happened the way most unfair systems do, quietly, through habits and excuses and the path of least resistance. Claire needed more attention. They said Claire was sensitive. Claire had it harder. And somewhere along the way, I became the one who could handle things, which meant I was the one who had to. That dynamic never really changed. Even after we both grew up, it just found new places to live. The week after I confronted Claire about my apartment, I brought it up again at my parents' place. We were sitting at their kitchen table, the same one where I'd done homework and eaten cereal, and learned slowly that peace often came at the cost of silence. Mom was cutting vegetables for dinner, her movements sharp and practiced. Dad sat across from me, reading the paper, glasses low on his nose. I told them calmly that Claire was letting herself into my apartment without permission. I said it wasn't okay. I said it made me feel unsafe. Mom didn't even look up. She said it was a small thing and that families share. She said I was blowing it out of proportion. She said Claire worried about me. I felt something tighten in my chest. I asked her why. Worrying meant opening my mail and going through my drawers. Mom paused, her knife hovering over the cutting board, and sighed like I was being difficult on purpose. She said Claire probably didn't mean anything by it. She said I shouldn't assume the worst. Dad shifted in his chair. He folded the paper and set it aside, but he didn't meet my eyes. He said I should try to get along. That life was too short for this kind of conflict. He said, "Your mom has enough stress." Enough stress. The phrase landed like a familiar weight. I realized at that moment that my discomfort had already been categorized as less important than keeping things smooth. Less important than Claire feeling challenged. Less important than Mom having to admit something uncomfortable about the way she had raised us. Driving home that night, I replayed the conversation in my head. The way you replay something you wish you'd handled differently. I thought about all the times I'd been told to be the bigger person. To let things go. To understand. Understanding, in my family, always flowed in one direction. I decided to try something practical, something simple. If words weren't working, maybe actions would. The next morning, I called a locksmith on my lunch break. I took a half day off and met him at my apartment. He was a quiet man with rough hands and a kind face. The kind of person who doesn't ask questions unless you offer answers. He changed the lock in less than an hour. When he handed me the new keys, I felt a flicker of relief. Small but real. This, I told myself, was what taking control looked like. I texted Mom to let her know I'd changed the locks and that Claire no longer had access. I didn't accuse. I didn't explain. I just stated it. The response came almost immediately. Mom called. I could hear the anger in her voice before she even said my name. She asked me how I could do something like that without talking to her. She said I was humiliating Claire. She said I was acting paranoid. I told her again that this was my home. I told her I needed privacy. I told her I wasn't asking for permission. There was a long silence on the line, the kind that feels intentional. Then she said she couldn't believe I was turning my back on my family. She said Claire was hurt. She said I was making things harder than they needed to be. Dad took the phone. His voice was quieter, almost pleading. "Marin, please. You know how your mom gets. Just give her the key for emergencies." "Emergencies?" I asked him, my voice tight. What kind of emergency required Claire to open my bank statements? He didn't answer that. He just repeated that I shouldn't make this a bigger issue than it was. I hung up feeling shaky, but also strangely clear. For the first time, I had done something concrete to protect myself. I told myself that once the initial shock wore off, everyone would calm down. I told myself this would reset things. It didn't. 2 days later, I came home from work and found Claire sitting on my couch like nothing had happened. She looked up from her phone and smiled. Before I could even ask how she got in, she held up a familiar piece of metal. My spare key. "Mom gave it back to me," she said, completely unconcerned. "She said you forgot that she had one too?" Heat rushed to my face. Anger and disbelief tangling together. I asked Claire why she thought this was okay. She shrugged, utterly unfazed. "Because it's not a big deal. Mom said you were being dramatic. Dad said you'll get over it." There it was. The rule book. Spoken out loud at last. My boundaries were optional. My feelings were negotiable. And Claire had been given the authority to decide which was which. I called Mom right then, standing in my living room while Claire watched, amused. I asked her why she had given the key back. Mom didn't deny it. She said she wasn't going to let me shut Claire out. She said it was unfair. She said she knew what was best. I told her she didn't get to decide that anymore. Her voice hardened. She said if I kept acting like this, I was going to tear the family apart. That sentence stayed with me long after the call ended, because it placed all the responsibility squarely on my shoulders. As if the problem wasn't the behavior, but my refusal to tolerate it. As if harmony only existed when I stayed quiet. Claire eventually left that evening, not because she understood, but because she got bored. She kissed my cheek on the way out and told me to relax. She said I worried too much. After she was gone, I sat alone on my couch and looked around my apartment. Really looked. The furniture I had chosen, the photos on the wall, the quiet that settled in once the door closed. This space was supposed to be proof that I had grown into my own life. Instead, it felt like a reminder of how easily it could be taken from me. That night, I lay in bed listening to the sounds of the city. Every footstep in the hallway making my heart jump. I realized I was no longer just uncomfortable. I was on edge in a place that was supposed to shelter me. The hardest part was admitting what that meant. It meant the problem was bigger than Claire. It meant the apartment was just the latest stage for a family pattern that had been running for decades. A pattern where one child was protected at all costs, and the other was expected to absorb the damage quietly. As I stared at the ceiling, I felt something shift inside me. Not resolution yet, not anger sharp enough to act on, just a heavy understanding settling into place. This wasn't about a key. It was about a rule book I had never agreed to. One that said my needs came second, and my space was always up for negotiation. And for the first time, I wondered what would happen if I stopped playing by those rules at all. I didn't know the answer yet, but I knew with a clarity that made sleep impossible, nothing would change unless I did. That question stayed with me through the next week as I packed a small suitcase for a work trip. Nothing dramatic. Just a few days out of town for a logistics review. Normally, travel gave me a sense of relief. Distance from home meant distance from tension. This time, I hesitated before I zipped my bag closed. I stood in my bedroom and looked around, checking drawers, straightening things that didn't need straightening. The way people do when they're trying to convince themselves they're in control. I unplugged my laptop. I stacked my mail neatly by the door. I locked the bathroom cabinet where I kept my personal papers, even though I knew the lock was flimsy and mostly symbolic. Before I left, I stood at the door longer than usual, my hand resting on the knob, listening to the quiet hum of the building. I told myself it would be fine. I told myself Claire wouldn't dare push it further now that things were tense. The trip itself was uneventful. Meetings blurred together. People talked about efficiency and margins, about problems that could be solved with spreadsheets. At night, I lay in my hotel bed, scrolling through my phone, half watching the news, half staring at the ceiling. I checked my apartment security app more than I cared to admit. Refreshing the screen. Even though it showed nothing but the steady green light that meant no alarms, no motion detected. Still, something sat wrong in my chest, a low, constant pressure I couldn't name. On the second night, my phone buzzed with a message from Rachel, my best friend. She asked how the trip was going and told me she hoped I was getting some rest. I typed back that it was fine, busy, but manageable. I didn't tell her about the knot in my stomach. I didn't want to sound paranoid. I didn't want to be the person who always expected the worst. It wasn't until the morning I flew home that I felt the shift. My phone was still on airplane mode when we landed, the cabin buzzing with the usual rush to stand up and grab bags. As soon as I turned it back on, notifications flooded the screen. A missed call from an unfamiliar number. 2 emails from my building management. And then, tucked between them, a message from a neighbor I barely knew, someone I'd nodded at in the hallway but never spoken to beyond a polite hello. "Hey," she wrote. "Everything okay at your place last night?" It was pretty loud. My pulse jumped. I opened the email from management first. It was short and formal, written in that careful tone that means they're already annoyed but still professional. It referenced noise complaints, mentioned multiple residents, had called after hours, and reminded me of the building policy regarding gatherings and quiet hours. It said further incidents could result in fines. I read it twice, then a third time, my hands starting to shake. I hadn't been home. I had been 2 states away, eating a sad sandwich in an airport terminal. There was no misunderstanding here. I didn't answer the neighbor. Not yet. I dragged my suitcase off the plane and made my way through the terminal, the sounds of rolling wheels and overhead announcements pressing in on me. By the time I got into the cab, my jaw ached from how tightly I'd been holding it. The city slid past the window as we drove, familiar streets suddenly feeling distant, like I was returning to a place I no longer fully recognized. When I unlocked my apartment door, the smell hit me first. Alcohol and perfume and something fried, heavy and stale. Music was no longer playing, but I could feel it in the room anyway, like an echo that had soaked into the walls. My shoes stuck slightly to the floor near the entryway. There were faint scuff marks by the door, footprints that weren't mine. I set my bag down slowly, my eyes scanning the room. The couch cushions were rearranged, one tossed on the floor. A thin layer of glitter dusted the coffee table, catching the light in a way that made my stomach turn. Empty cups crowded the counter. Some with lipstick smears that weren't Claire's shade. Others with names written in marker. Someone had moved my plants to make space, pushing them toward the window like an afterthought. I walked into the kitchen and opened the fridge. It was nearly empty. Food I had bought before leaving was gone, replaced by half-finished containers and takeout boxes shoved in without lids. I closed the door carefully, afraid that if I slammed it, something inside me would crack open along with the sound. In the bathroom, a towel I didn't recognize hung crookedly on the rack. My soap dish was smeared with makeup. In the bedroom, my bed had been used, not sucked in carefully, but sprawled across. The comforter twisted and pulled like it had been part of the party. I stood there for a long moment, my hands balled into fists, breathing shallow, feeling like I had walked into the aftermath of a break-in that no one would take seriously because nothing obvious was stolen. My phone buzzed in my hand. A notification from social media. I opened it without thinking. There it was. A video posted on Claire's account. The camera panned across my living room. Lights low, music thumping, people laughing and raising glasses. The caption read something breezy about hosting friends at my place, with a heart emoji and a location tag that wasn't mine but close enough that anyone who knew me would recognize it. In the comments, people joked about how lucky she was to have such a great space. Someone asked if she had just moved. Claire replied with a laughing face and said something about finally having a place that feels like her own. My hands went numb. I watched the video again, slower this time. I saw my couch, my rug, my lamp. I saw strangers dancing where I usually sat with a book after work. My apartment had become a backdrop, a prop in someone else's story, stripped of any connection to me. I called Claire. She picked up on the second ring, her voice bright and casual, like we were catching up over coffee. "Hey, what did you do in my apartment last night?" I asked, my voice sounding far away, like it belonged to someone else. She laughed. "Oh, relax. We just had a few people over." "A few people?" I told her about the email from management. I told her about the complaints. I told her I could get fined. She sighed, exaggerated, like I was boring her. "Oh my God, Marin. It was one night. Everyone was having fun. You should be grateful your place is nice enough to host." I told her she had no right. I told her she had crossed the line. She cut me off. "You're being dramatic. It's good content. People loved it." Good content. I stared at the mess around me, at the empty bottles and glitter on my table, and felt something cold settle in my chest. This wasn't just carelessness. It was entitlement. It was the assumption that my space existed to serve her needs, her image, her audience. I hung up before I said something I couldn't take back. Mom called a few minutes later because of course she did. She had seen the video. She told me I shouldn't be so upset. She said Claire was just enjoying herself. She said the building overreacted. I told her management had sent a formal warning. I told her my neighbors were angry. Mom made that sound again, the one. That meant she was about to smooth everything over at my expense. "Well," she said, "maybe next time you could tell Claire your rules more clearly." As if this was a scheduling issue. Dad didn't call. He never did when things were uncomfortable. I could picture him sitting in his chair, hearing Mom talk, deciding silence was easier than stepping in. After I hung up, I sat on the edge of my bed and looked at the room. Really looked at it. It felt violated in a way I couldn't quite explain. Not because of the mess alone, but because of what it represented. My home had been turned into a stage, a place for performance and approval, a backdrop for someone else's version of success. I spent the rest of the evening cleaning, not because it made things better, but because it was something I could do. I threw away cups, wiped counters, washed sheets. Each small task felt like reclaiming a square inch of territory, even though I knew the larger problem remained untouched. When I finally sat down, exhausted, I checked the comments on Claire's video one last time. Someone had written how jealous they were. Someone else asked when the next party would be. Claire had liked them all. I locked my phone and leaned back against the couch, staring at the ceiling. The building was quiet now, but it didn't feel peaceful. It felt watchful. That was the night I understood something I had been avoiding. My apartment was no longer just a place I lived. It had become a symbol, a trophy, a tool. And as long as Claire saw it that way, nothing I said would matter. I went to bed with the lights off and the door locked, listening to the distant sounds of Boston settling into sleep. My body was tired, but my mind wouldn't slow down. I kept replaying the video, the comments, the casual way Claire had brushed off the consequences. Somewhere between midnight and morning, a thought formed with a clarity that startled me. If my home could be turned into her stage this easily, then staying wasn't protecting me. It was enabling her. I didn't know what I was going to do yet. I just knew that whatever came next would have to change the rules completely. And for the first time, I didn't feel afraid of that idea. That feeling stayed with me in the days that followed, quiet but steady, like something new had taken root. I went back to work, answered emails, sat through meetings, but my mind kept circling the same realization. Claire wasn't just careless. She was building something on top of my life, layer by layer. And she didn't see anything wrong with it. I found out about Jared by accident. Mom called me one afternoon while I was making dinner, the pan hissing softly as onions hit hot oil. Her voice had that light, almost excited tone she gets when she thinks she has good news. She told me Claire was seeing someone new. His name was Jared. He worked in real estate analysis, she said, and his family was very well off. She said it like it mattered, like it explained something important. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. I asked how long they had been together. Mom said not long, but it was serious. She said Claire was really trying this time. Trying at what? I didn't ask. I already knew the answer. Then Mom added something that made my hand still over the stove. She said Jared loved Claire's place. She said he thought it was impressive that Claire had managed to buy an apartment in Boston at her age. The room went quiet except for the burner. I turned it down slowly. I asked Mom what she meant. She hesitated, just a beat too long. Then she said Claire had told Jared the apartment was hers. She said it was just a little exaggeration. She said there was no harm in it. She told me not to make a big deal out of it, and not to embarrass Claire. Not to embarrass her. The words landed heavy in my chest. I asked Mom if she had corrected Claire, if she had told her that lying like that wasn't okay. Mom sighed and said Claire was insecure. She said Claire needed to feel stable. She said men like Jared expected certain things. She told me I should understand. That word again, always aimed at me. I stood there in my kitchen, staring at the steam rising from the pan, and felt something click into place. The parties, the videos, the way Claire moved through my apartment like it was a showroom. It wasn't just about having fun. It was about crafting an image. My home wasn't just a place to hang out. It was proof. It was a prop in a story Claire was telling about herself. Later that week, I saw it for myself. I came home from work early one evening, exhausted and eager for quiet. As I turned the corner onto my street, I noticed a car I didn't recognize parked out front. Something about it made me slow down. It was clean and expensive looking. The kind of car that suggests careful maintenance, and money that doesn't need to announce itself. When I walked into the building, I could hear voices coming from my apartment. Laughter, low and easy. I hesitated outside my door, my hand hovering over the handle. For a moment, I considered turning around, giving myself more time to prepare. Then I reminded myself that this was my home. I opened the door. Claire was there, of course, perched on my couch like she belonged there. Next to her sat a man I had never seen before. He stood as soon as I walked in, tall, well-dressed, confident in the way people are when they have never had to doubt their place in a room. Claire beamed. "Marin," she said like this was a surprise. "This is Jared." He smiled at me, polite but assessing, his eyes moving quickly over the space, then back to my face. He said it was nice to meet me. He said Claire had told him so much about the apartment. The apartment? Not my apartment. Just the apartment, like it existed independently of me. I forced a smile and nodded. I said, "Hello?" I didn't correct him. Not yet. I didn't know how. Not in that moment. With Claire watching me so closely. Claire launched into a story about how hard it had been to find a place in the city, how competitive the market was, how proud she was of what she had managed to do. She gestured around the room as she spoke, pointing out features I had chosen, furniture I had saved for, details that held pieces of my life. Jared listened intently, impressed, asking questions about square footage and location. I stood there feeling strangely invisible. It was like watching someone else narrate my life while I hovered at the edges, reduced to a supporting role in my own space. At one point, Jared turned to me and asked how long I had lived there. The question was simple, innocent. Claire's eyes flicked toward me, sharp and warning. I answered carefully. I said I'd been there for a while. I said I loved the neighborhood. I said it was convenient for work. Claire jumped in immediately, filling the silence. She talked about how she had always known she wanted to live in Boston, how she had worked so hard to make it happen. Jared nodded, clearly impressed. He said it was refreshing to meet someone so driven. Driven. I almost laughed. After they left that night, I sat alone on the couch and let the quiet settle back in. I replayed the evening in my head, every look, every carefully chosen word. Claire had not just lied. She had woven the lie into something bigger, something that required my silence to survive. I called Mom again, though part of me already knew how it would go. I told her what had happened. I told her Claire had introduced my apartment as her own, right in front of me. Mom's response was immediate and sharp. She asked me why I couldn't just let Claire have this. She said Claire finally had something going for her. She said I didn't need to correct everything. I asked her why it was my responsibility to support a lie that erased me. Mom said I was being selfish. She said Jared didn't need to know all the details. She said I shouldn't interfere. Dad was in the background again. His voice distant. He told me to drop it. He said it would only cause trouble. He said Claire would grow out of it. Grow out of it. Claire was 27 years old, and my parents were still shielding her from the consequences of her choices. I hung up feeling hollow. It was one thing to have my space invaded. It was another to have my identity quietly rewritten to make someone else look better. Over the next few weeks, the pattern became clear. Claire brought Jared over more often. She treated my apartment like a showroom, tidying up before he arrived, lighting candles, opening windows. She posted more videos, more photos, carefully cropped to show just enough of the space to sell the story she was telling. The comments rolled in, full of admiration and envy. Each time, I felt myself shrink a little, not because I believed the lie, but because everyone around me seemed to accept it as harmless, as necessary, as something I should tolerate for the sake of peace. I started noticing the cracks in Claire's confidence, too. The way she checked Jared's reactions. The way she laughed too loudly at his jokes. The way she mentioned his family, his connections, his expectations. She was building a version of herself she thought he would respect. And my apartment was the foundation. One evening after Jared left, I confronted her quietly. I told her she couldn't keep telling people the apartment was hers. I told her it was wrong. She looked at me like I had betrayed her. She asked me why I was always trying to make her look bad. She said I didn't understand how things worked. She said if I cared about her at all, I would help her. Help her lie. Help her climb. Help her at my own expense. That was when it finally sank in. This was not about a misunderstanding or a lack of boundaries. It was about power, about image, about who got to matter more. I went to bed that night with a heaviness I couldn't shake. The apartment was quiet, but it no longer felt like a refuge. It felt like a stage set between performances, waiting for the next act. As I stared at the ceiling, I realized something that made my chest tighten. If Claire was willing to erase me to impress a man she barely knew, then this was never going to stop on its own. And whatever came next was going to hurt someone. I just didn't know yet who it would be. It happened on a Wednesday, the kind of weekday that usually feels forgettable. Gray sky, damp sidewalks, the air smelling like rain that couldn't commit. Work let me out early because a client call got pushed, and I should have felt lucky. Instead, I felt that familiar pull in my stomach. The quiet dread that had started living under my ribs since Claire began treating my home like a shared family resource. On the train back, I watched people sway with the movement, faces tired, eyes fixed on their phones. A woman across from me held a bag of groceries on her lap like it was fragile. A man in a suit tapped his foot impatient. Nobody looked at anyone else. Boston has that way of making you feel surrounded and alone at the same time. I kept thinking about my apartment, about whether the lights would be on, whether something else would be moved. I tried to tell myself I was being dramatic, but that lie had started to taste stale. When I got to my building, the lobby was quiet. The front desk was staffed by a young guy I recognized by sight, but not by name. He nodded as I walked past, like he'd seen me 100 times. I waited for the elevator and watched my reflection in the brushed metal doors. My hair was pulled back, my coat damp at the shoulders, my face looking older than 32 in the harsh lobby lighting. I looked like someone who should have had her life under control. The elevator ride felt too slow. The hum of the motor, the soft music piped in, the smell of someone else's cologne lingering from earlier. When I stepped out onto my floor, I noticed something small that made my steps slow down. A faint scuff mark near my door, fresh enough to catch the light, like someone had shifted their feet there, waiting, pacing, or hesitating. I told myself it could be anyone, a neighbor, a delivery person. My mind always tried to give the benefit of the doubt. I put my key in the lock and turned it. The door opened easily. No resistance, no tug of a deadbolt fully engaged. My first thought was that I'd forgotten to lock it that morning, which would have been unlike me. My second thought came right behind it, colder and sharper. Somebody else had unlocked it. Inside, the apartment was quiet. No music, no voices. The curtains were half open, letting in the dull afternoon light. The air smelled like vanilla. One of the candles Claire liked, the kind she never bought for herself but always seemed to have when she was in my space. I stepped in and closed the door behind me slowly. A vase of cheap grocery store tulips sat on my counter, still in the plastic sleeve, like a set piece. I set my bag down and walked through the apartment the way you walk through a place that has been touched by someone else. Careful, alert, trying not to react too quickly. Claire wasn't there. That should have made me feel relieved. Instead, it made my stomach tighten, because it meant she had been there recently and left. It meant she had arranged my space for some purpose that didn't require her presence. Then I heard a knock. Not on my door, but on the wall. A gentle tap, like someone testing if I was home. The sound came from the hallway side close, and my pulse jumped. I stood still, trying to place it. Then there was another sound softer, the faint click of someone's key in a lock nearby. Then footsteps on the carpeted hallway outside my door. A few seconds later, there was a real knock on my door. I didn't move right away. I held my breath, listening for the rhythm, for the intent. It was steady, confident. Not the hesitant knock of a delivery person. Whoever it was assumed I would answer. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. A man stood there, tall, wearing a dark coat that looked expensive without trying. His hair was neatly styled. He held his phone in one hand, glancing down at it like he was checking a message, then back up at my door. He looked annoyed. Not worried. I knew who he was before I opened the door. Jared. I should have kept it closed. I should have ignored it. But some part of me needed to see how far the lie had traveled. I needed to know what kind of person would stand at my door like he belonged there. I opened it partway, chain still on, and asked if I could help him. Jared looked at me, then past me, like he was trying to confirm something. His eyes moved quickly over my shoulder, into my living room, taking in the tulips, the neat pillows, the magazine. He smiled, but it wasn't warm. It was the smile of someone who thought he understood the situation. He said he was looking for Claire. I told him Claire was not here. His brows lifted slightly. Not here? He looked surprised, then skeptical, as if my answer didn't fit the version of the world he'd been given. He asked where she was. I told him I didn't know. He glanced down at his phone again, then back up. He said Claire told him she would be home. He said he had been trying to reach her. He held up his phone slightly, like the proof of unanswered calls mattered. I kept my voice calm. I said maybe she stepped out. Jared let out a short breath, almost a laugh. He said she never stepped out without telling him. He said he was supposed to meet her here. Here. The words sat between us, heavy. He leaned in slightly. Not close enough to break the chain barrier, but close enough to make his presence fill the doorway. His gaze landed on me again, more direct this time. And something in it shifted. Curiosity turned into judgment. He asked who I was. I told him my name, Marin. I said, I live here. That last part came out without force, just the truth. For a second, Jared looked confused, like a file in his mind didn't match the label. Then the confusion cleared, replaced by something else, understanding, followed immediately by contempt. He said, Oh, you're her sister. I nodded. He tilted his head, eyes narrowing as if he was studying me. He asked if I was the sister Claire had mentioned, the one who couldn't keep her own place together, the one who was always leaning on Claire. My throat went dry. I felt my face go hot, then cold. I asked him what he meant. Jared's mouth curved slightly, not quite a smile, more like he enjoyed having the upper hand. He said Claire had explained everything. He said Claire was generous. He said it wasn't easy supporting families who didn't have their act together. Supporting? Supporting who? He looked at me from head to toe in a way that wasn't openly rude, but still made me feel like I was being weighed and found lacking. He said Claire told him, You're the useless sister who crashes at your younger sister's place. The words landed like a slap, sharp and clean. I didn't flinch, at least not outwardly, but inside something cracked. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet break that changed the shape of everything. At that moment, I understood exactly how Claire had positioned me in her story. Not as a sister with a career and a lease, not as a woman who had built something for herself. I was a prop. A warning. A contrast. The failure she used to make herself look like success. I could have corrected him. I could have said, This is my apartment. I pay the rent. I work hard. I could have pointed at the framed photo on my shelf, the one with me and Rachel on a weekend trip. Or the stack of work binders on my desk. Or my name on the mail sitting by the door. I could have listed every detail like a lawyer building a case, but something in me refused. Not because I was weak. Not because I was afraid. But because I suddenly realized that explaining myself to Jared would not restore anything. It would only invite him into the argument, and he didn't deserve a seat at my table. So I didn't defend myself. I just looked at him. He shifted, uncomfortable with the silence. People like Jared expect a reaction. They expect emotion they can manage, anger they can dismiss, tears they can pity. When you give them nothing, they don't know where to put themselves. He asked if Claire had told me she was coming. His tone was sharper now, like he had already decided I was the obstacle. I told him no. He asked if I could let him in to wait. I stared at him for a second, then said, No. That surprised him. He blinked. He said he thought this was Claire's place. I said, It is not. My voice was quiet, but it didn't shake. Jared's jaw tightened. He looked past me again, like he could see the lie falling apart in the background. Then he tried a different approach. He said, Claire worked hard. He said, She deserved nice things. He said, Maybe I should be grateful she lets me stay. Grateful. The word tasted bitter. I felt my hands curl against the inside of the door, nails pressing into my palm. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. The room behind me felt suddenly exposed, like the walls had thinned. I told him I was not discussing this with him. Jared scoffed. He said, Of course. He said people like me always got defensive. He said Claire was too kind, that she should stop letting family drag her down. People like me. The family dragged her down. I watched his mouth move and heard the words, but it was like my brain had stepped back from my body. I could see myself standing there, chain on the door, holding myself still. I could see him in his expensive coat, his confidence built on a story he had accepted without question. And I could see Claire behind it all, invisible but present, pulling strings. For a second, I wanted to scream. Not at Jared. At the entire situation. At the years of being told to keep the peace, at Mom for excusing it, at Dad for avoiding it, at Claire for taking and taking until she started taking my identity, too. But I didn't scream. I asked him to leave. Jared stared at me like he couldn't believe someone like me would tell him what to do. Then he leaned closer, voice lower, and said Claire was going to be very upset when she found out I had spoken to him like this. I held his gaze and said, "You can tell her whatever you want." My words sounded calm, but inside my chest, something was racing. Not fear this time. Something like clarity. Jared stepped back. He looked at my door chain like it offended him. He muttered something under his breath, then turned and walked away, his shoes muffled by the hallway carpet. Halfway down the hall, he pulled out his phone again, tapping aggressively. Probably calling Claire. Probably demanding an explanation. I closed the door and locked it, then slid down against it until I was sitting on the floor. My knees pulled up, arms wrapped around them, not because I was trying to be small, but because my body needed an anchor. The apartment was silent. The tulips on the counter looked ridiculous now, like a decoration in a crime scene. I sat there for a long time, staring at the baseboard, noticing a tiny scratch in the paint I had never seen before. My mind replayed Jared's words over and over. Not because I believed them, but because of what they revealed. Claire had been telling people I lived off her. Claire had been using my home to impress a man. And to do that, she had turned me into the villain in her story, the pathetic older sister, the cautionary tale. And Mom knew. Mom had told me not to embarrass her. Dad had told me to let it go. That was the part that made my stomach twist. Not Jared, not even Claire. It was the fact that the people who raised me had watched this happen and decided the lie mattered more than my dignity. After a while, I stood up and walked through my apartment again. This time, I saw it differently. The neat pillows weren't comfortable. They were evidence. The magazine wasn't casual. It was staged. The tulips weren't a gift. They were a prop. My apartment had been a set. And I had been written out of the script. I went into my bedroom and opened my closet. Running my fingers over my coats, my sweaters, the things that had carried me through winters and hard years and early mornings. I felt suddenly tired. Bone tired. The kind of tired that comes when you realize you've been fighting for respect in a place that was never built to give it. I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the wall, listening to my own breathing. I didn't cry. Not yet. I felt too stunned for tears. What I felt was a slow, heavy sinking, like something important had dropped away inside me and left a hollow space. This was the day I was erased. Not because Jared believed a lie, but because Claire had been confident enough to tell it, and because my parents had been comfortable enough to protect it. By the time the sun went down, my hands stopped shaking. But the calm that replaced it was not peaceful. It was resolved. It was taking its first quiet step. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do. Not yet. I just knew I would never stand in my own doorway again and be treated like I didn't belong. I went to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and drank it slowly, as if I were trying to teach my body that it was still safe to exist in this space. Then I sat at my table and stared at the door, waiting for the next sound, the next key turn, the next act in Claire's performance. Because now I understood the truth. She was not going to stop until something forced her to. I learned that the hard way. In the hours after Jared left, my phone lit up with Claire's name, over and over. I didn't answer at first. I sat at my kitchen table, watching the screen buzz and go dark, like a heartbeat that didn't belong to me. The air in my apartment felt too still. The kind of stillness that comes after a storm, when you're waiting to see what got destroyed. When I finally picked up, I didn't say hello. Claire launched into it like she'd been rehearsing. She demanded to know what I said to Jared. She demanded to know why I was being difficult. She said I embarrassed her. Like that was the real crime. Not the lie, not the key, not the fact that a stranger had stood in my doorway and called me useless with his whole chest because she fed him that word. I told her I didn't discuss her relationship with strangers in my home. I told her Jared showed up uninvited. I told her he insulted me. Claire made a sharp little laugh, the same one she used when we were kids and she knew she had gotten away with something. She said he was just being protective. She said he didn't mean it like that. She said if I hadn't acted weird, none of it would have happened. I felt my jaw clench. I asked her if she had told him the apartment was hers. There was a pause. Then she said it wasn't a big deal. She said she was trying to build a life. She said I should be happy for her. She said Jared had standards, and she wasn't going to show up looking like she had nothing. I asked her what I was supposed to be in that story. The nothing she stepped on? Claire's voice hardened. She said I always made everything about me. She said I was jealous. She said I had always been jealous because she was the fun one and I was the responsible one. Like responsibility was some kind of flaw. She told me I needed to loosen up. Stop acting like a victim. Stop overreacting. I ended the call before my voice did something I couldn't undo. My hands were shaking again. No fear this time. Anger, grief, something between those two. I walked to my window and looked out at the city. People moving on the sidewalk below, carrying groceries, walking dogs, living ordinary lives. For a moment, I felt separated from them, like they were on the other side of thick glass. I wondered how many of them were going home to places that were truly theirs, places where the lock meant something. That evening, I drove to my parents' place because I needed to say it out loud. To the two people who had created this mess and kept insisting it was love. Mom opened the door like she had been waiting. Her face already set in that expression that says, I am not here to listen. I am here to manage it. She ushered me in, talking too fast, telling me Claire was upset, telling me Jared was upset, telling me I had caused a scene. She said it like I had knocked over a glass at dinner, not like my sister had built a whole lie on my back. Dad was in the living room, sitting in his usual chair, the television on low. He glanced up when I walked in, then looked back down at his hands. I could see the tension in his shoulders. The way he braced for conflict like it was a weather pattern he couldn't control. I told them what happened. I told them Jared came to my apartment. I told them he called me useless. I told them he said I was crashing at Claire's place, in my own doorway, as if I were a guest who should be grateful for permission. Mom's eyes narrowed as I spoke, not in concern for me, but in annoyance at the inconvenience. When I finished, she didn't ask if I was okay. She asked what I said to him. I said I told him he couldn't come in. I said no. Mom threw her hands up. Maren, she said, you humiliated your sister. Do you have any idea what you did to her? My stomach dropped. I asked her if she heard me. I asked if she understood that Claire lied. That Claire gave him a story where I didn't exist as a person, only as a problem. Mom waved me off. She said Claire is sensitive. She said Claire is trying to make something of herself. She said Jared is a good catch, and I shouldn't sabotage it. Sabotage. That word made my throat tighten. I asked her why protecting my home was sabotage. I asked her why my dignity mattered less than Claire's relationship. Mom said I was being dramatic. She said I always took things personally. She said if I had just played along, everything would have been fine. I turned toward Dad then, because I needed at least one of them to look at me like I mattered. I asked him if he thought it was fine. Dad sighed. He rubbed his forehead the way he does when he wants the problem to disappear. He said he wished we would all just get along. He said Claire gets carried away. He said, you know how your mom worries? He said, life is hard enough. Don't make it harder. I asked him if he thought Claire should have a key to my apartment. Dad didn't answer right away. He stared at the floor like the answer was written there. Then he said, it's just a key. It's family. It's not worth tearing everyone apart. There it was again. The threat. If I asked for respect, I was the one tearing things apart. If I wanted privacy, I was the one causing damage. Claire could break in, lie, throw parties, and I would still be the problem for refusing to smile through it. I told them I had tried everything. I reminded them I had asked Claire to stop. I reminded them I had asked Mom to take the spare key back. I reminded them I changed the locks. I reminded them Claire got the key again anyway. I reminded them management had warned me after the party. I told them I could be fined. I told them I could lose my apartment if this kept escalating. Mom scoffed, like a fine was imaginary. She said the building wouldn't do anything serious. She said I was overthinking it. I asked her if she would say that if it was her name on the lease. Mom's face flushed. She said it didn't matter whose name was on the lease, because you're family. She said, a piece of paper doesn't mean you get to shut people out. She said, when she raised me, she didn't raise me to be cold. I stood there in their living room, under the warm light of the lamp I remembered from childhood, and felt something in me quiet down. Not because I accepted what she was saying, but because I finally saw it clearly. Mom didn't believe I had a right to boundaries. Dad didn't believe it was worth the discomfort of defending me. Claire believed the world belonged to her because they taught her it did. For a moment, I pictured my apartment again. The tulips, the neat pillows, the way Claire set the scene like she was preparing for a photo shoot. I pictured Jared at my door, looking through me like I was furniture. I felt my body respond the way it had responded for years. That old urge to explain, to fix, to convince. Then I felt something else rise up and cover it. Something colder and steadier. I stopped talking. Mom kept going for a minute, filling the silence with excuses. Dad cleared his throat. The television murmured in the background. My family waited for me to argue back, to plead my case, to give them something they could twist into another reason I was too much. I didn't. I nodded once, like I was acknowledging the end of a conversation that had been happening my whole life. Mom asked if I was even listening. I said I was. Dad finally looked up. His eyes met mine for a brief moment, and I saw something like regret there, but it was too small and too late. He opened his mouth like he might say something. Then he looked away. That was the silence that decided everything. It wasn't the kind of silence that happens when people don't know what to say. It was the kind that happens when they know and choose not to. I left soon after. Mom called after me, telling me to call Claire and smooth things over. Dad told me to drive safely. No one apologized. No one offered to take the key back. No one said they would make it right. In my car, I sat in the driveway for a long minute before turning the engine on. My hands were steady on the steering wheel. My face felt numb. I realized I wasn't crying. I had spent so many years trying to get my family to see me. And in one night, I finally accepted that they did see me. They just didn't value what they saw. On the drive back to Boston, the streets looked the same. The buildings lit up, the traffic moving, people living their lives. But I felt different. I felt like I had been walking around with a hope I couldn't afford. And now it had been taken away, leaving behind a clean, clear emptiness. When I got home, I didn't go straight inside. I stood outside my building with my keys in my hand and looked up at my windows. The light was off, the blinds half closed, the shape of my living room barely visible. I thought about what it would feel like to keep living like this. Always braced. Always waiting for the next intrusion, the next excuse, the next lecture about family. I thought about how tired I was. Then I thought about the one thing my family couldn't argue with. Distance. Not a conversation. Not another boundary talk. Not another promise that would be broken the moment Claire got bored. Real distance. I walked upstairs and went inside. But I didn't turn on music or pour a glass of wine or do anything that resembled comfort. I sat at my table with my laptop closed in front of me and stared at it, letting the quiet settle around my decision. Moving out was not something I wanted. It was something I was being forced into. One dismissal at a time. I took a deep breath and reached for my laptop. I wasn't ready to act yet. Not that second. But I was ready to stop waiting for them to change. And that was the first step. I didn't announce it. I didn't threaten anyone with it. I didn't even say the word out loud at first. I just sat there at my kitchen table, the laptop closed, the apartment quiet in that way that feels heavier than noise, and let the decision settle into my bones. For once, I was not trying to convince anyone. I was choosing something for myself. The planning happened quietly, in pieces, over the next few days. I searched for listings late at night with the lights dimmed low, like I was hiding from my own life. Secure building, key fob access. Front desk staffed at all hours. Cameras in the hallways. Elevators that didn't move without authorization. I read every detail slowly, carefully. The way you read something when you know it might save you. I found a place across town, still in Boston, but far enough that it felt like another world. A newer building with thick walls and a lobby that smelled like clean stone instead of old carpet. The kind of place where no one could talk their way inside just because they knew your mom. I toured it during my lunch break, walking through the space with my hands clasped behind my back, imagining silence, imagining coming home and not bracing myself. I signed the lease the same day. That night I called Rachel. I didn't give her the whole story. I didn't need to. I just said I was moving and that I needed help, quietly. She didn't ask questions. She said she would be there. Luke offered the same when I texted him, a simple message asking if he could help me move some things after midnight. He replied with one word. Always. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell Claire. I didn't even tell my coworkers beyond saying I might be offline for a day or two. This was not about disappearing dramatically. It was about leaving without giving anyone the chance to interfere. I packed slowly, deliberately. Not everything, just what mattered. Clothes I loved. Books that had gotten me through hard years. The framed photo of me and Rachel laughing on a windswept beach. I left behind anything that felt like an obligation. The mug Mom gave me because she thought it suited me better than the one I loved. The throw pillow Claire claimed was basically hers, because she liked it so much. The extra chair Dad insisted I needed in case people came over. I didn't want anything that could be used as an excuse to come looking for me. On the night of the move, Rachel and Luke arrived just after 11. Both dressed in dark hoodies, like we were planning something illegal. The hallway was quiet, most of the building asleep. The lights dimmed to that soft yellow meant to discourage loitering. We spoke in low voices, more out of instinct than necessity. Rachel asked if I was okay. I nodded. Luke handed me a roll of tape without a word. There was comfort in that, in people who didn't need explanations to show up. We worked quickly. Boxes stacked, bags carried. Each trip down the hallway felt like a small release. My life, leaving piece by piece, not with chaos, but with intention. At one point, I stopped and looked around my apartment, nearly empty now, and felt a strange mix of grief and relief. This place had been mine once, or at least it should have been. The moving truck idled outside, engine low and steady. We loaded everything in the dark, the night air cool against my skin. When the last box was in, Luke closed the truck door gently, like he didn't want to wake the building. Rachel squeezed my hand. "You're doing the right thing," she said. I believed her. Before we left, I walked back upstairs one last time. The apartment echoed now. Bare walls, floors clean and empty. I stood in the middle of the living room and listened. No music, no voices, just the hum of the building and my own breath. I walked to the door and pulled the spare key from my bag, the one Mom had insisted on giving Claire back. I placed it in an envelope with my landlord's name on it and slid it through the office slot downstairs on my way out. No note, no explanation, just a return. The new building greeted me with quiet efficiency. The night staff checked my identification, handed me a sleek black key fob, and welcomed me by name. That small courtesy almost made me cry. Being recognized without being claimed, being acknowledged without being invaded. When I stepped into my new apartment, the door clicked shut behind me with a sound that felt final in the best way. I stood there in the dark for a moment, then turned on the light. The space was clean, untouched. No history yet. No fingerprints but mine. The first few days were almost unnerving in their calm. I kept my phone on silent and face down. I slept deeply without waking to every sound. I cooked and left things exactly where I put them, then came back to find them unchanged. I walked through the halls and nodded at strangers who didn't know my name, who didn't know my family, who didn't have any expectations of me at all. This wasn't running away. This was choosing safety. This was choosing a life where the lock meant something. I didn't feel victorious. I felt steady. And in that steadiness, I waited, knowing the quiet would not last forever. The fourth night in my new apartment, I fell asleep faster than I had in years. Not because I was exhausted, though I was, but because my body finally believed it was safe. The building hummed softly. A low, steady sound that felt more like protection than noise. The air smelled clean and neutral, not like someone else's cooking or perfume. Just the quiet blankness of a space still becoming mine. I left one small lamp on in the living room. I told myself it was because I liked the way the light warmed the hardwood. But if I was honest, it was because part of me still believed light meant control. I rolled onto my side and thought about nothing in particular. Not Claire. Not Mom. Not Dad. Not the apartment I left behind. Just the simple comfort of my pillow smelling like my own shampoo. My shoulders loosened. My jaw unclenched. I drifted off without bracing for impact. Then a sound cut through my sleep. At first, it didn't register. A sharp, insistent chirping that didn't belong in a dream. It pulsed in a rhythm that felt wrong, too urgent to ignore. My eyes opened to darkness, my heart already speeding up before my mind caught up. The sound was not inside my apartment. The building was quiet. It was my phone. I reached for it on the nightstand, squinting against the sudden brightness of the screen. Missed calls, notifications stacked on top of each other. A voicemail icon blinking. The time read 3:07 in the morning. For a few seconds, my mind went blank. I thought maybe it was work, some emergency that couldn't wait until daylight. Then I saw the number, unknown. It rang again immediately. I almost let it go. I almost turned the phone face down, and told myself it wasn't my responsibility anymore. Then I heard it, faint but unmistakable, bleeding through the speaker before I even answered, sirens. Not close to me. Close to something I knew. I answered, my voice rough with sleep, and said hello? The voice on the other end was calm and professional. They asked if I was Maren Brooks. Hearing my name spoken like that at 3:07 in the morning made the room tilt. I swallowed and said yes. They asked if I was safe. I sat up, the blanket sliding down my legs, and glanced around my dark bedroom, the outline of my dresser, the closed door, the stillness. I said, "Yes, I am safe." There was a pause, measured, careful. Then they said there had been an incident at my former residence, and asked if I still lived there. Former residence. The words were too clean for what they stirred up inside me. I said, "No, I moved." Another pause. Then they said there had been an alarm activation, and a report of an attempted break-in. Building security responded. The current tenant called 911. My heart began pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. My apartment was quiet, unchanged, but my body snapped back into old patterns. That familiar vigilance that never fully slipped. I asked what happened. They didn't give details. They said they needed to verify information and asked if I could come to the station as soon as possible. I looked down at my hands, glowing pale in the phone light, and realized I had been holding my breath. I let it out slowly and said I would come. When the call ended, I sat there, listening to the building hum. No footsteps, no voices, no keys turning in my lock. And still my nerves were on fire, as if someone had just been inside my space. I stood and pulled on sweatpants and a sweatshirt. My movements automatic. As I filled a glass of water, my mind formed the only explanation that made sense. Claire. Not anger at first, just a heavy certainty. Claire still believed my old apartment belonged to her. In her mind, my lease was paperwork. My boundaries were background noise. The apartment was a symbol she had already claimed. And symbols don't change ownership just because facts do. My phone buzzed again, and I flinched. Mom. I stared at the screen until it went dark. Then Claire. I didn't answer. Then Dad. My throat tightened. For a moment, muscle memory almost won. Then I remembered Mom blaming me for embarrassing Claire. Dad looking away. The silence that had made my decision for me. I let it ring. Texts followed, stacking faster than I could read. Where are you? Call me. Answer now. Then another message. Short and sharp. This is not funny. Something cold settled in my chest. Claire never believed consequences were real until they were loud enough to scare her. I walked to the window and looked out at the Boston street below. Wet pavement reflected street light. Somewhere far away, sirens faded into the night. My mind returned to my old building. The hallway, the muted lighting. I pictured Claire standing there, confident, maybe dressed up, maybe holding her phone just right, and Jared beside her, because that was part of this. Claire didn't just want access. She wanted proof. She wanted to perform. I could see it clearly. Bringing Jared late at night because late at night feels dramatic. Wanting to show him the place again. Wanting to reassure him. Wanting to hold the lie together. Then the key didn't work, because I had returned it. Because I moved. Because someone else lived there now. I imagined the tight smile, the forced laugh, the refusal to let reality land. She would say the lock was broken. She would say the building changed something, anything. But she'd been pretending. And when the key failed, I knew what she would do next. She would try anyway. She always did. I grabbed my coat and slipped on my shoes. My phone buzzed again. More messages, but I didn't read them. I stepped into the hallway of my new building. Clean carpet, soft lighting. Everything calm and ordinary. The night staff looked up from the desk and asked if I was okay. I nodded and said I got a call and needed to step out. Outside, the cold air stung my face. I pulled my coat tighter, annoyed at how my hands still shook. I hated that Claire could still pull my body into panic, even from miles away. I waited on the curb, watching headlights pass. A couple walked by laughing, unaware. The world kept going. A car pulled up. I got in and gave the driver the address of the station. My voice sounded steady. Inside, I felt fragile. During the ride, my phone buzzed nonstop, face down on my lap. I stared out at closed storefronts and street lamps reflected on wet pavement. Alarm activation. Attempted break-in. The new tenant called 911. That phrase stayed with me. New tenant. Someone else had been asleep in my old bedroom. Someone else had trusted the lock. And Claire had dragged her chaos into a stranger's life without hesitation. When the car stopped, the station glowed bright against the dark. I paid and stepped out, breath fogging in the cold air. I stood there with my hand on the door, feeling the weight of what I was walking into. I had moved to get away from her. But at 3:07 in the morning, she had still found a way to make my heart race. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. The station was harshly lit. All fluorescent glare and pale walls that made everything feel exposed. The air smelled like old coffee and disinfectant. Voices echoed softly. Shoes scuffed against tile. And somewhere a printer hummed. It was the kind of place where emotions had nowhere to hide. I noticed them almost immediately. Mom stood near the hallway entrance, twisting a tissue in her hands. Mascara smudged beneath her eyes. She looked shaken in a way I had rarely seen, like the ground beneath her certainty had shifted. Dad was a step behind her, hands shoved into his pockets, staring at the floor like he hoped it might open up and swallow him. Claire sat rigid on a bench, arms crossed tight against her chest, jaw clenched, eyes fixed straight ahead. She looked angry, not scared. Angry that things had slipped beyond her control. And then there was Jared. He stood near Claire, tall and stiff, his confidence stripped down to something brittle. When he saw me, his eyes widened slightly. There was no contempt in his expression now, only confusion, maybe embarrassment. He looked like a man realizing he had walked into the wrong story. Mom rushed toward me the moment she saw me, her voice rising. She asked where I had been, why I would disappear like this, why I had scared everyone. Her words tumbled over each other. Panic tangled with accusations. I didn't move toward her. I said I was fine. I said I moved. I said I was safe. Claire stood abruptly. She demanded to know why I had not told her. She accused me of ruining her life. Her voice was sharp, rehearsed, like she was still performing even here. Before I could respond, a uniformed officer approached. She introduced herself as Officer Bennett and asked me to come with her into a small room so we could talk privately. Mom tried to follow, but the officer stopped her gently and said she needed to speak with me alone first. The room was plain. A table, 2 chairs, a stack of forms. No comfort, no distractions, just facts. Officer Bennett asked if I still lived at my former apartment. I said no. I told her I had moved earlier in the week. She asked if I had given anyone permission to enter after I left. I said no. I told her I returned the spare key to the landlord. She nodded and wrote it down. She asked if my sister had ever lived there. I said no. I explained that Claire had a spare key for emergencies and that I had asked for it back, but my parents gave it to her anyway. Hearing it said out loud made it sound exactly like what it was. Not love, not concern. A pattern. Officer Bennett asked how often Claire had entered my apartment without permission before I moved. I hesitated, then said, 23 times in 6 months that I knew of. I explained how I started counting after my mail was opened and my belongings were moved. I mentioned the party, the management warning, and the social media posts. She listened without interrupting. Then she explained what had happened that night. The new tenant had been asleep when the alarm went off. Building security responded first and found 2 people attempting to access the unit. Frightened, the tenant called 911. Officers arrived and found my family members in the hallway along with a guest, Jared. Officer Bennett said the attempt to enter was not accidental. She said there was evidence of tampering at the door. She said the tenant didn't know them and believed it was a break-in. My stomach tightened as I pictured a stranger jolting awake in the dark, heart racing, thinking someone was forcing their way inside. It felt too familiar. Officer Bennett asked if I wanted to document the prior unauthorized entries, not just tonight. She explained that it would establish a pattern. She also explained the option of issuing a trespass warning to Claire. I hesitated. My parents had raised me to believe involving the police was crossing an unforgivable line. Keep it in the family. Don't make things public. Don't embarrass anyone. Then I remembered Jared at my door calling me useless. I remembered Mom telling me not to make Claire look bad. I remembered Dad looking away. I remembered cleaning up after a party I didn't host. I said yes. I said I wanted it documented. Signing the form steadied me. Facts have weight. They don't bend just because someone wants them to. Officer Bennett said she would bring my family in so we could clarify next steps. When they entered the room, the tension thickened. Mom immediately started explaining, saying they were worried, saying they thought I was inside, saying they had to check on me. Her voice trembled, dramatic and urgent. Officer Bennett met her gaze and said, "Concern does not grant legal access." She said I was an adult. She said, "Permission matters." Claire argued next. She said it wasn't a real break-in. She said she had been there before. She said it was basically her place, too. Basically. Officer Bennett turned to me and asked if I had given Claire permission to enter after I moved. I said no. I said I returned the key. I said I did not share my new address. Mom stared at me like I had betrayed her. She asked why I would do this to my family. She said I made them look like criminals. Dad finally spoke. He said they just wanted to know I was okay. I asked him if he knew Claire had told Jared the apartment was hers. Dad looked away. That was enough to answer. Jared spoke quietly then. He said he didn't know. He said Claire told him it was her place. He said he thought everything was fine. His voice lacked the certainty it once carried. He looked at Claire like something important had cracked. Claire snapped at him to stop talking. Officer Bennett explained that a trespass warning could be issued, formally barring Claire from the property. She said it wasn't a restraining order, but it created a clear legal record. Mom gasped. Dad rubbed his forehead. Claire froze. Officer Bennett asked me if I wanted the warning issued. I took a breath and said, yes. Mom started crying. Real tears now. She said she couldn't believe I was doing this to my own sister. She said, after everything they had done for me. I looked at her and said, I didn't call the police. I just stopped covering. The room went silent. Officer Bennett outlined what would happen next. Claire would be served the trespass warning. If she attempted to enter again, consequences would escalate. The system would handle it. Claire signed the paperwork with a shaking hand, anger radiating off her. It was the first time I had ever seen her truly rattled. When we were dismissed, Mom tried to reach for me again, but I stepped back. I told her we could talk later. Not here. Claire glared at me like she didn't recognize me. Dad said nothing. Jared avoided my eyes. His expression stripped bare of arrogance. Outside, the cold Boston air hit my face and filled my lungs. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I didn't check it. I stood there for a moment, breathing, letting the night ground me. I didn't feel victorious. I felt clear. For the first time, the truth didn't belong only to me. And that changed everything. The days that followed were quieter than I expected, not in a dramatic way, not the kind of silence that rings in your ears, but the gentle, steady quiet of a life no longer under siege. I went back to my new apartment in Boston and closed the door behind me. And for the first time in months, the sound of the lock clicking felt like reassurance instead of resistance. Mornings became something I stopped rushing through. I woke up without my heart jumping at every small noise. I made coffee and left the mug on the counter, then came back an hour later to find it exactly where I left it. No drawers opened, no mail shifted, no feeling that someone had passed through my life while I was gone. I hadn't realized how much of my energy had been spent just guarding space until I no longer had to. Work felt different too. I was more focused, less scattered. My mind wasn't constantly drifting back to questions like, did Claire stop by today? Or, did Mom give her another excuse? I could sit through meetings without that low hum of anxiety running under everything. My coworkers noticed before I did. One of them told me I looked rested. Another said I seemed lighter. I smiled and said I had just moved, which was true in more ways than one. My family didn't disappear completely. That was never my goal. But the shape of our relationship changed, and for once, it changed on terms that didn't require me to disappear inside myself. We met only in public places after that. A cafe near the Common, a quiet diner outside the city, neutral ground where walls and witnesses made boundaries easier to hold. Mom was careful now, like someone walking through a room after the furniture had been rearranged. She still tried to push sometimes. Still asked questions that edged too close to places I had decided to keep private, but she stopped short when I didn't answer. Dad listened more than he spoke. He still avoided conflict, but I could see something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. A recognition that silence had cost him something. Claire was different. She didn't apologize. I didn't expect her to. But she stopped showing up unannounced. She stopped asking for keys. She stopped treating my life like an extension of her own. The confidence she once carried so easily was quieter now, tempered by consequences she couldn't charm away. We spoke less, and when we did, it was guarded. There was a distance between us that felt sad, but also necessary. Jared didn't come up again. Whatever illusion Claire had built, with my apartment as its foundation, had collapsed under the weight of reality. I didn't ask questions. Some truths don't need follow-up. At night, in my new place, I would sometimes sit on the couch with the lights low and think about how close I came to losing myself, trying to keep everyone else comfortable. I thought about all the times I told myself it wasn't that bad, that I was overreacting. That family just does things differently. I thought about how often women are taught to doubt their instincts, especially when those instincts ask for space. The truth is, I didn't leave because I was angry. I left because I was tired of being erased. Protecting my peace didn't make me cold. It made me honest. It showed me that boundaries are not punishments. They are instructions for how to treat you if you want to stay in your life. Some people can follow them. Others reveal themselves when they cannot. I didn't win anything in the way people usually think of winning. There was no grand confrontation, no apology that fixed everything. No moment where everyone suddenly understood. What I gained was quieter and more permanent. I gained sleep, focus, a sense of safety that didn't depend on anyone else behaving better. Sometimes healing looks like drama. Sometimes it looks like a locked door that stays locked. I still live in Boston. I still walk the same streets, ride the same trains, and live an ordinary life. But inside, something fundamental has shifted. I no longer explain myself to people who benefit from misunderstanding me. I no longer confuse tolerance with love. And I no longer hand over my keys, literal or otherwise, to people who refuse to respect what they open. If you have ever felt guilty for choosing yourself, I hope my story reminds you that peace is not something you are given. It is something you protect. And if you have ever been told you are too much or not enough for your own family, remember this: silence can be power and truth can be the loudest revenge. Call to action. So, I've laid it all out there. This was my breaking point. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace in your family and protecting your own sanity? Tell me what you think in the comments below. I really want to hear your stories.